Redeem Academy.
Yo, what is up, Science Squirrels? This is Johnny. Welcome to Redeem Academy. We are in the middle of a unit called What is Biology? Today, the answer to that question is genetics. It's going to be a good day. If you don't have a notebook, you can get one at my website, redeemacademy.org. Link in the description below. Big question today: how does the information in DNA support the idea that life was designed by God? Oh man, it so does. So today, I'm actually gonna tell you about 5 different scientists. Let me show you who they are. Okay, we're gonna start it off with Mendel, followed by Watson and Crick. Can't forget about Franklin, and then we'll finish it off with Meyer. All right, so here's a video of Mendel at college, and it's kind of a long video. I'm just gonna show you this a little bit. So he's at college, he really wants to become a teacher, and he studies physics and chemistry. One of his professors was the guy who discovered the Doppler effect, which is when cars go vroom. They call that the Doppler effect. But he failed his tests because he had test-taking anxiety, so he ended up back as a monk in this place called Brno, and then I'm going to start the video right here.
I tried to find a way to increase our food supply using what I'd learned so far. I figured there must be some use for my skills. So I spent 8 years in the monastery garden, breeding and researching heredity on over 28,000 pea plants.
8 years. And he would take a paintbrush, wiggle, 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 and he'd take the pollen off one pea plant flower and put it on the other pea plant flower. This dude was meticulous.
And analyzing the results statistically. That was not common practice back then. It was only decades later that people realized how important statistical analyses are in botany. You can still find the descendants of my peas in the monastery garden in Brno.
All right, so this picture right here is the real garden where he actually did his research, and he lived in the 1850s, so that's almost 200 years ago now. And they still have pea plants from his pea plants growing there. Those are some really old pea plants.
In 1866, I published the results of my research. But yet again, nobody understood me.
So it ended up that nobody really even took notice of his work. He lived at the same time as Darwin, but nobody really took notice of his work until after he died. But today he's well known. There's a statue of him, and you know, obviously we're talking about him. They've named this branch of genetics after him. It's called Mendelian genetics. And so what he discovered is that there are dominant traits and recessive traits. And so I mentioned to you guys the other day I have blue eyes. So if a parent has brown eyes and they marry somebody else with brown eyes, it's very possible for them to have children with blue eyes. So that's kind of weird. So, you know, here's a brown-eyed person, okay? You can see their brown eyes up close, okay? And so it'd be weird to have brown eyes, and then you marry someone with brown eyes, and then you produce a child with blue eyes. That's pretty weird. Now, the alternative would be blue eyes, okay? And so if a person with blue eyes had children with another person with blue eyes, they could never make a child with brown eyes, okay? Now, let me show you this on paper. Okay, this is just at the back of my notes. You don't have to write this down, but just pay attention. So we draw boys as squares and girls as circles, okay? So if a boy has brown eyes, he could potentially have big B for brown, and then he could have little b for blue. He could also marry a girl who is big B for brown and little b for blue. Now, because he has a big B, he gets brown eyes, so I'm going to color him brown. His wife also has a big B, so he gets brown, or she gets brown as well. Now, when they have children, let's say they have 4 children. Let's say they're all girls. It is possible that this big B, they only give half of their genes. So it's possible that this big B gets with that big B, so they could have a child where that happens. Or it's possible this big B gets with that little b, or it's possible this little b could go with that big B, so it'd still be a big B, little b. Or it's possible that this little b could go with that little b. Now, the big B is big because it's dominant. So if you have at least one big B, then you're brown. But if you have 2 little b's, you're blue. We call that one recessive. So not studying eyes, but studying plants, pea plants, Mendel figured this out. And I'll teach this in great more detail in a whole unit of genetics later, but Mendel figured out there are dominant traits and there are recessive traits. Now, if you have blue eyes, the only thing you can make is more blue eyes because you have 2 little B's and your wife has 2 little B's. And so this is my parents. My mom and my dad both have blue eyes, so they had children and they all have blue eyes. So let's write this down. Mendel called these factors, but today we call them genes. And the dominant allele, or gene, is what Mendel called the one that takes over when both are present. So if you have both, you're going to have brown eyes. The one that would disappear if both were present, Mendel called that the recessive. So this is the recessive gene, this is the dominant gene. Now, since Mendel figured this out, let's add some color to Mendel. Is it just me, or do Catholic monks and Jedi Knights wear the exact same robes? All right, so I want to show you one more version of dominant and recessive genes. So we've got dominant brown eyes, recessive blue eyes, hair color. So here are my parents when they got married. Okay, this is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And, you know, just a couple of nice brown-haired people. So brown hair is dominant. And you just, you know, you get married and you're young and you just think everything's gonna go great. And then you have your first child and bam, little girl, red hair, no soul. So sad, so sad. This is my older sister, Kristen. So you have brown hair and bam, you have a redhead. How does that happen? Again, red hair is a recessive trait, okay? And I like to make fun of my older sister, Kristen, because she picked on me. But don't worry, an angel was then born to my parents, little Johnny right there with his blonde hair. Blonde hair is also a recessive trait. And so you get 2 brown-haired people, and they have a blonde hair or a strawberry blonde-haired daughter and then a regular blonde-haired son. Couple of recessive traits. And then I grow up and my hair falls out, but not before it turned brown, okay? And so a couple different genes. One of the reasons Mendel was successful with pea plants is that pea plants are controlled by, usually, most of their traits are controlled by a single gene that only has 2 options, a dominant option and a recessive option, okay? So some of the things in pea plants that are controlled by just 1 gene with 2 options. The color of a pea can be green or yellow. The texture of a pea can be round or wrinkly. The pod that the peas come in, so if you've ever had sugar snaps, can be round or it can be wrinkly. So peas are a really good thing to study because it's 1 gene controlling 2 features that are dominant or recessive. Humans, on the other hand, are much more complicated. Our hair color, our eye color, our height, a lot of the things that you look at with us, our skin color, there's a lot of things that can mix up and not just be dominant or recessive. So Mendel was very successful with pea plants because they only have a dominant or a recessive option. We'll have a whole unit where we just study Mendelian genetics. It's really fun to look at that. All right, let's write Mendel's words down. Okay, he is known as the father of genetics and was the one to figure out dominant and recessive by working on pea plants. That's our boy Mendel. The gene that takes over when both are present, that's the dominant. Okay, and the gene that hides when both are present, that is the recessive. All right, moving on to our next people, we're gonna look at Watson and Crick. Okay, let's add some color to Watson, Crick, and Rosalind Franklin. They're all part of this next story. All right, so Watson and Crick are the scientists who discovered the structure of DNA. We're gonna watch a little cartoon about this.
We are in 1953 in Cambridge, a city where scientists are racking their brains to corner what was known as
We have discovered the molecule of life.
All right, so those guys who just busted in are Watson and Crick. And this is a famous moment in the history of science because they discover the molecule of life and they go to a bar and they announce it to everybody.
Okay, let's rewind a little. Several researchers over many years discovered that in the nucleus of our cells there was a substance called DNA, which contained all our genetic information, and it was made of 4 compounds: adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. How was...
Okay, let's stop right there and go to the notes. Okay, the molecule of life that they discovered is DNA. So this is a DNA molecule right here. And it's got this characteristic shape that they're going to show called a double helix. And there are 4 letters in DNA: G's, C's, A's, and T's. And you can see the A's and the T's better up here maybe. Those are all called nucleotides. Okay, and if you like coloring, go ahead and color in all these A's, T's, C's, and G's. All right, so back to this video now. Each A, T, C, and G, which is guanine, adenine, thymine, and cytosine, is a molecule itself that has a different shape, but they're all very similar.
How was it possible that the whole book of our life was written with just 4 letters? Our celebrating friends James Watson and Francis Crick thought that maybe the answer was in the structure of DNA, and they were trying to solve this 4-pieced puzzle that was driving all the scientific community crazy. They had 2 clues. The first one was a discovery made by Erwin Chargaff, who found that in all organisms he tested, the relative amounts of adenine and thymine were equal, and the same happened with guanine and cytosine.
Okay, so that's a huge clue. In everything he tested, when he tested tissue from living things, there were always the same number of A's and T's. There were always the same number of C's and G's. That's because A's always connect with T's and C's always connect with G's. Now these guys were trying to figure out deep inside of a cell in the middle, the nucleus. When I told you guys earlier that, you know, certain creatures wear underwear, the nucleus is that little bag around their underwear. The A's are always connected to the T's and the C's are always connected to the G's inside the little bag of underwear. So that was one of the clues these guys had.
The second clue came from Rosalind Franklin, an experienced chemist who generated DNA crystals and shot X-rays through them to study their structure. The X-ray picture showed a repeated pattern.
The other clue they had was this picture. Watson and Crick had basically stolen this picture from this scientist. They worked in the same building, but they weren't friendly. She didn't like the guys didn't like her, and she had a research partner who thought he was her boss, but he wasn't her boss, and they didn't get along. And so he ended up giving that photo that she had taken to them.
Oh, that's not very nice.
Now, there's a whole story behind that. I'm going to show you another video for that. Okay, so here's Rosalind Franklin's story. I'm taking a clip out of another video for this.
Use X-ray techniques to study the structure of DNA, then one of the hottest topics in science. Franklin upgraded the X-ray lab and got to work, shining high-energy X-rays on tiny, wet crystals of DNA.
This is how she
took the
took the
academic
picture.
culture at the time wasn't very friendly to women, and Franklin was isolated from her colleagues. She clashed with Maurice Wilkins, a lab mate who assumed Franklin had been hired as his assistant. But Franklin kept working, and in 1952, she obtained Photo 51, the most famous X-ray image of DNA. Just getting the image took 100 hours.
So it took her 100 hours to capture this image. What she did was called X-ray crystallography, and this image was basically solid evidence that DNA was a double helix. She took an X-ray of DNA for 100 hours, or maybe it was 100 hours of work to get it all set up and then capture for 80 hours, I don't know. And then she needed to put another 365 days into analyzing and just doing a ton of math, stuff that you could use like a computer to do now that they didn't have computers like that back then. So check this out.
To analyze it would take a year. Meanwhile, the American biologist James Watson and the British physicist Francis Crick were also working on finding DNA's structure. Without Franklin's knowledge, Wilkins took Photo 51 and showed it to Watson and Crick.
Now, Watson and Crick are not interested in doing all the math that Rosalind Franklin's doing, but they look at this photo and it has a signature of a double helix on it. And so just from that, Watson and Crick have their own style of how they're trying to figure out the structure of DNA. And everybody kind of knows if you figure out the structure of DNA, and if DNA is the genetic molecule, everybody's trying to figure out what's the genetic molecule, you're going to be famous. So now, James Watson, while I'm making this video today, I actually looked it up because I have on the notes that he hasn't died yet. And I'm like, has he died yet? Because he's 97 years old. This video is probably 15 years old of him. and he looks really old in this video. And he's talking about what they did in the 1950s when they built models. So their technique was model building. So he shows how they built models. Their models were made out of metal, but I think this is cardboard, and maybe they were cutting out cardboard because the metal models took too long. He shows how we could imagine these hydrogen bonds between the nucleotides. And so he just describes, these are his old hands. We could see the hydrogen bonds forming here, and there's all these different ways that molecules could bond together. And then he says how they could stack on top of each other three-dimensionally. And so look how old this guy is in this video 15 years ago. He's probably 85 years old there or something. And they could imagine how it could three-dimensionally look. And the cool thing about atoms is, you know, they're you know, like way, way, way smaller than this, but you could, you know, scale them up and still imagine what they'd look like. And so he's showing you, like, this is how I imagined it in my mind. And so they built a model of this and imagined what it looked like, and it was right. And so the model building plus stealing the photo from Rosalind Franklin was the way that they figured this out. Now let me find a picture of their actual model. Okay, so here's a picture of them. And James Watson was young. This guy right here is James Watson, that old guy you saw in that last video. He was really young, like younger than he should have been to be able to be in a PhD program. He didn't even have a PhD yet. But this was their model. You can see they have all these bars and these clamps, and they were able to figure out the structure. You can see a poster of the drawing in the background of it. And these two guys figured it out and won Nobel Prizes, which is like a huge thing to win the Nobel Prize in science. Now we gotta finish this video because the story gets even sadder for Rosalind Franklin. Here, let's see.
And used that to build a few potential structures. Eventually, they arrived at the right one. DNA is made of two helicoidal strands, one opposite the other, with bases at the center like rungs of a ladder.
So they call DNA the twisted ladder. It looks like a twisted ladder. It's a beautiful molecule. I mean, you can just look at the molecule, it's like, God must exist. This thing's elegant. Even the concept of beauty. Why are there things that are beautiful? It just points to God.
Watson and Crick published their model in April 1953. Meanwhile, Franklin had finished her calculations, come to the same conclusion, and submitted her own manuscript. The journal published the manuscripts together, but put Franklin's last, making it look like her experiments just confirmed Watson and Crick's breakthrough.
Did you catch that? That is so shady. Franklin never knew that these guys had used her data to really jumpstart their model building. And then she does all the calculations and confirms, yep, it's this thing these guys drew up with models. Yeah, my data proves that they're right. When really, like, my data proves this is what it is, and they built models and, you know, they got there, but without my data, they never would have got there. Super shady. Now the story gets even worse.
What do you mean?
Because
instead of inspiring it. But Franklin had already stopped working on DNA and died of cancer in 1958, never knowing that Watson and Crick had seen her photographs.
So she dies, never knows any of that stuff, and they go on to win the Nobel Prize. Pretty sad story. All right, let's write the words down about Watson, Crick, and Franklin. These two were the first to publish the correct structure for the DNA molecule and later won the Nobel Prize for it. That's Watson and Crick. The C's, G's, A's, and T's that make up the backbone of the DNA molecule are called nucleotides, and the shape of the DNA molecule is called a double helix. All right, we're moving on to my boy, Stephen Meyer. I love this guy.
You think the creator of the universe is God.
I do.
And then out of the universe comes the creation of a single cell, which again is God.
Right. Here's the evidence, though. When we see information in a digital or alphabetic or typographic form, and this is what we actually see in the DNA, when Francis Crick elucidated what he called the sequence hypothesis in the late 1950s, he realized that the 4 subunits along the interior of the DNA are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written text or digital characters in a section of software. What we know from experience is that whenever we say information of that sort, it always comes from a mind. Bill Gates, our local hero, has said that DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever devised. Richard Dawkins has acknowledged that it functions like a machine code. Well, what we know is that software comes from a programmer. And in fact, whenever we see information of that kind, whether it's in a software program or a hieroglyphic inscription or a paragraph in a book, it always arises from a mind, not a material process. So the discovery of information at the foundation of life, and even the simplest living cell, I argue, is decisive evidence of the activity of a designing mind in the origin of life.
All right, so Stephen Meyer is a Christian, and he's a top-tier philosopher of science. And so really fascinating individual. He went to Cambridge as well, where Watson and Crick did the research to discover the structure of DNA. And he's maybe one of the founders and definitely one of the leaders in what's called the intelligent design movement. And this is like a group of scientists who are less interested in trying to popularize a creationist view of origins and more interested in trying to have a really tight, sharp argument for the existence of God. And sometimes they almost don't even want to say God, and so they call it intelligent design. Let me show you the Discovery Institute's website. And actually, I think the Discovery Institute, they're located in Seattle. That's why he called Bill Gates their local hero, because Bill Gates lives in Seattle. They may have some other stuff too, but the main thing is intelligent design. They're much more like academic. Like this would be more like something you'd share with like a real nerd, like a college kid who's majoring in science. But their Center for Science and Culture, you know, they've got a resources tab. They've got this blog called Evolution News that I read sometimes. They have a YouTube channel. They've got this hilarious video YouTube channel called, it's called Long Story Short. Hilarious videos and extremely technical and accurate, but also so funny. But they're like very different than Answers in Genesis. And so they're going to be old Earth creationists. My take on the old Earth, young Earth thing is like, awesome. There's both. My personal take on it is like, we don't want to like have a war within the church on an issue like this. So there are certain issues that like as Christians, we have to have a strong opinion on, like Jesus is God. Okay, like there's the Trinity, like these are foundational Christian doctrines. Jesus Christ rose from the dead on the third day. These central issues of the Christian faith, we call those close-handed issues. Like I'm gonna hold tight to this. And then there are issues that I would call open-handed issues, like you wanna believe in an old earth, you wanna believe in a young earth. I like Christians on both sides of that. And I don't wanna divide over that issue. And so Discovery Institute people are probably gonna tend to be old earth creationists, but like, bro, let's have peace between both views on that. So anyway, I'm all for Answers in Genesis and what they're trying to do. I'm all for the Discovery Institute and what they're trying to do. Let's get to this next video. Okay, so Discovery Institute's YouTube channel is called Discovery Science. I'm literally hitting the subscribe button right now. This guy has his own channel as well called Long Story Short, so I think they work together with this guy, and his videos are hilarious. I wish we could watch this whole thing. Find Long Story Short on YouTube. Watch every video if you're a nerd, because they're very technical, but they're also so funny. Here we go.
Think about some of the coolest designed things. Cell phones, rocket ships. When we look at them, we find layer upon layer of complexity. Things specifically designed to carry out a task. Millions of lines of code or engineering in order to do what they do. The more we understand about how these apps or spaceships work, the more impressed we can be at the sheer amount of information needed to create all these parts and get them working together to perform a function. Even if we had never seen a rocket ship before, we would know that it was designed by someone. As complex as all of these things are, they pale in comparison to this.
The single-cell bacterium.
And that pales in comparison to your handsome or beautiful self. Look at you, so amazing. Why are you and this little bacterium so amazing? Glad you asked.
Okay, so I can't show you this whole video, but Stephen Meyer, one of his tightest arguments is information always comes from a mind, okay? And we're gonna just watch a little bit more of this, whether it's a single-celled bacterium.
The single-cell bacterium.
Or it's you contain information in the form of DNA. DNA is coded information. Let's get a little deeper into this.
DNA contains coded instructions and programmed commands that are read, interpreted, and carried out automatically by the cellular machinery in your body, just like computer code. With software, the instructions come in the form of letters and punctuation that are arranged to encode computer commands. In DNA, the instructions come in the form of the nucleotide bases, A, T, C, and G, that are arranged to encode biological commands, amino acids, and other instructions as well. There are programmed instructions in DNA just like in computer code and software.
So all those A's, T's, C's, and G's, you have 6 billion letters of DNA or nucleotides in you that are A's, T's, C's, and G's. And you saw the ones and zeros on the spaceship and on the cell phone at the beginning. Binary code is what it's called for like the base level code that codes for computers, and computers are in a rocket ship, or cell phones are computers basically. So there's a real symmetry or a real correspondence, like they're the same, whether it's a cell that's coded for by the 6 billion letters of DNA, or whether it's a computer that's coded for by ones and zeros. There's just 4 things instead of 2 things.
The world's smartest, most eggiest of eggheads agree that DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. The machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. DNA is something like the hard drive on your computer, containing programming. Life is a DNA software system containing digital information or digital code. From Bill Gates to Richard Dawkins, Francis Collins, and Craig Venter, they all agree DNA is a code. This is absolutely amazing because we know that digital computer code and software systems don't write themselves. Advanced programmed technology only comes from one source: intelligence.
That's the argument. You can only get information, and there's a specific kind of information. It's called specified information. You can only get information, specified information, from a mind. You can get random information, like penguin, turtle, taco, cheesecake, just random useless information. You might be able to get that from nothing. But you cannot get specified, useful information from any source except for a mind. And so then you say, what mind created life? What mind created the information we see in life? I'll give you a hint. G-O-D. Okay, so it's our boy Stephen Meyer who wrote the first book really outlining these arguments. So we have the ones and zeros coming out of his book here. Let's add some color to Stephen. Okay, we got some words to write down. Philosopher of science and leader in the intelligent design movement. That is Stephen Meyer. Meyer argues that our repeated and uniform experience is that this kind of information only comes from a mind. It has to be specified. Just like written language or computer code, this genetic information must have come from an intelligent designer, DNA. As a Christian, this is who Meyer believes the intelligent agent or designer to be: the Lord God Almighty. How does the information in DNA support the idea that life was designed by God? This is Meyer's argument. The information in DNA is specified information. Specified information only comes from a mind. A mind powerful enough to create DNA has to be someone like God. That's how the argument goes. It's a solid argument. I remember studying cell division that makes reproductive cells. So like how basically a dad and a mom produce the cells that will make their children in college, and it being like an act of worship for me to see how God made it possible for a man and a woman to each equally contribute the genetic information that will become their children. And it's like, it's your DNA. Half your DNA, half your wife's DNA. It comes together. It's going to make your children. And I remember seeing the design of how that works and how it's 50-50 you, 50-50 your wife. It's going to be like half and half. And the Bible says the two become one flesh. And it's like the two become one in the children. And I remember just worshiping God in the library in my secular university at Oregon State University, and just seeing God's fingerprints all over, and just it being an act of worship to just see the complexity and the design of just this tiny microscopic process called meiosis. Man, that's beautiful to see the Lord's fingerprints on something like that. And that's what DNA is, man. It's just the Lord's fingerprints. It's like Stephen Meyer said, it's a signature in the cell, and it's shouting out, God made this. I hope that you guys can appreciate the beauty and the design of biology. I hope this lesson helped you to see that. Make a little comment in the video and say what was something that you learned today. And like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Thank you so much for watching my videos. I just love doing this. I'm having so much fun making these videos. Have a great day. Bye.